Hey everyone, welcome back to Botanic Haven, the channel all about gardening, plant care, and creating those beautiful little green spaces, whether you're working with a tiny windowsill or a whole backyard. I'm so glad you're here today because we're talking about one of the most beloved herbs out there, basil. And specifically, we're going to talk about growing it indoors, which sounds simple but honestly trips up so many people, including me, when I first started out. Basil is one of those plants that looks effortless in cookbooks and garden magazines. Big, lush, dark green leaves. That incredible smell when you brush your hand against them, the way it transforms a bowl of pasta or a fresh caprese salad into something special. But when you actually try to grow it on your kitchen counter, things can get frustrating really fast. The leaves turn yellow, the stems get leggy, the plant bolts and turns bitter before you've had a chance to enjoy it. Sound familiar? Don't worry, I've been there, and I'm here to walk you through exactly what's going wrong and how to fix it. I've spent years growing herbs indoors, and basil has been my most rewarding and most humbling teacher. I've killed more basil plants than I can count, and every single one of them taught me something. Over time, I figured out the 6 most common mistakes people make when growing basil inside, and once I stopped making them, everything changed. My plants got fuller, lasted longer, and produced so much more. Today I'm going to share all of that with you, in plain, simple terms, the way a friend would explain it over a cup of tea. Before we dive in, I want to say something quickly. If this guide has helped you, write 1 in the comments, and if not, write 0. This way I'll know which tips are most useful for your garden. Your feedback genuinely shapes what I cover next, so take 2 seconds and drop that number. It means a lot more than you might think. Okay, let's start with the very first and probably the most common mistake, choosing the wrong spot in your home. Most people grab a basil plant from the grocery store, set it on their kitchen counter because that's where they cook, and then wonder why it's dying within a week. The problem is that kitchen counters, unless they're right next to a south-facing window, are usually not bright enough for basil. This plant is native to tropical regions, particularly South Asia and Central Africa, which means it evolved under intense, direct sunlight for most of the day. It's not a shade-loving plant at all. It craves light the way some of us crave coffee in the morning, urgently and consistently. I remember talking to a gardener named Daisy who had a gorgeous old farmhouse with thick stone walls and small windows. She loved growing herbs and had a whole collection of pots on her kitchen table. Everything else seemed to do okay. Mint, chives, parsley, but her basil always looked sad and stretched out. The stems were long and thin, reaching desperately toward the window, and the leaves were tiny and pale. When she moved her basil to a south-facing bathroom window, one with a frosted glass panel that still let in tons of light, the transformation was remarkable. Within 2 weeks, the plant was bushing out, the leaves doubled in size, and the colour deepened to that rich, glossy green that we all want to see. The rule of thumb is this: basil needs at least 6 to 8 hours of bright, direct light every day. In most homes, that means a south or southwest-facing window in the northern hemisphere. If you don't have that kind of natural light available, and a lot of apartment dwellers don't, a grow light is absolutely worth the investment. You don't need anything expensive. A simple LED grow light set on a timer for 14 to 16 hours a day will keep your basil extremely happy. Place it about 6 to 12 inches above the plant and watch it thrive. Now let's talk about the second big mistake, which is overwatering. This one is heartbreaking because it comes from a place of love. You want your basil to be healthy, so you water it often, checking the soil every day, giving it a little drink here and there. But here's the thing: basil hates sitting in wet soil. Its roots need air just as much as they need water, and when the soil stays soggy for too long, those roots start to rot. Root rot is almost always a death sentence for a potted basil plant, and by the time you notice the leaves are drooping and yellowing, the damage is already done underground. The correct way to water basil is to let the top inch or so of soil dry out between waterings, and then water thoroughly, meaning you pour water in until it drains out the bottom of the pot. That drainage is crucial. Never let your basil sit in a saucer full of standing water. A friend of mine named Oliver learned this the hard way after losing 3 basil plants in a row. He was watering every single day because he thought that's what a tropical plant would need. When he switched to watering only when the soil felt dry to the touch, his 4th plant lasted the entire summer and gave him more basil than he could use. The frequency will vary depending on your home's humidity, the size of the pot, and the season. But the soil test never lies. Stick your finger in, and if it's still moist, come back tomorrow. The third mistake is closely related to watering, and it's about the pot itself. Using a pot without drainage holes is one of the fastest ways to kill any herb, and basil is especially sensitive. I see this so often. People use cute decorative containers, mason jars, ceramic bowls, things that look beautiful on a shelf but have absolutely no way for water to escape. The water collects at the bottom, the roots drown, and the plant gives up. If you've got a decorative container you love, that's completely fine. Just use it as a cache pot, meaning you keep your basil in a plain nursery pot with drainage holes inside the decorative one, and remove it when watering to let everything drain properly before putting it back. While we're on the topic of pots, size matters more than most people realize. A lot of grocery store basil comes in tiny plastic pots, sometimes with multiple seedlings crammed together. Those little pots are not meant for long-term growing. They're basically designed to keep the plant alive just long enough for you to use a few leaves before it dies. When you bring basil home, give it a proper transplant into a pot that's at least 6 inches in diameter, ideally with some good organic potting mix. The extra space lets the roots spread out, which directly supports stronger leaf growth above the soil. The fourth mistake is not pruning, or pruning incorrectly. This is where basil becomes a genuinely fascinating plant because, unlike most things in life, cutting it back actually makes it grow more. Basil has a natural tendency to grow straight up and produce flowers, which is called bolting. And once it flowers, the leaves become smaller, more bitter, and the plant starts redirecting its energy into seed production rather than leaf production. Your job as a basil grower is to delay that flowering for as long as possible, and the way you do that is by pinching off the growing tips regularly. Every time you see a stem that has 6 or more leaves, pinch it off just above the second or third pair of leaves. This signals the plant to send out 2 new branches from that point, which means more stems, more leaves, and a fuller, bushier plant overall. You should also pinch off any flower buds the moment you see them forming, those little spiky clusters that start appearing at the top of the stems. I know it can feel wrong to pinch off something that looks like it's about to bloom, but trust me on this. A woman named Rose, who joined one of my online gardening groups, once admitted she never pruned her basil because she felt guilty hurting the plant. When she finally tried it for the first time, she couldn't believe how quickly her plant responded. It went from a tall, spindly thing with a handful of leaves to a wide, compact bush overflowing with fragrant foliage. The fifth mistake is ignoring temperature and drafts. This one catches a lot of people off guard because they think their warm indoor home is perfect for a tropical plant. And it can be, but there are invisible threats that we don't always think about. Cold drafts from windows in winter, air conditioning vents blowing cool air in summer, and even the cold air that seeps through a single-pane window at night can stress basil significantly. Basil is extremely sensitive to temperatures below 50 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 10 degrees Celsius. Even brief exposure to cold can cause the leaves to turn black and collapse, and once that happens, the plant rarely recovers. A neighbour of mine named Lucas had a beautiful basil plant sitting in a sunny window all through autumn. But when the temperatures dropped, he kept forgetting to move it away from the glass at night. The window was leaking cold air, and the plant was essentially experiencing near-freezing temperatures while he slept. He'd wake up to find more black leaves each morning and couldn't figure out why. The fix was simple. Move the plant a few inches away from the glass in the evening, or slide a folded towel between the pot and the window at night during cold months. You can also use a thermometer near your plant's location to check the actual overnight temperature, which might surprise you. Similarly, air conditioning is a silent killer of indoor basil in summer. If you've got a vent blowing cold, dry air directly onto your plant, move it immediately. Basil wants warmth, stable temperatures between 65 and 85 degrees Fahrenheit, and air that's relatively still. A light breeze from a fan on low can actually be good for strengthening the stems, but a constant blast of cold air is very different. It stresses the plant, dries it out unevenly, and encourages fungal problems. The sixth and final mistake, And one that I think is the most overlooked is using poor soil or never fertilizing. A lot of people use whatever bag of potting mix is on sale, or they reuse old soil from a previous plant, and then they wonder why their basil looks tired and pale even when they're doing everything else right. Soil quality is the foundation of everything. Basil needs a rich, well-draining potting mix that holds just enough moisture without becoming waterlogged. Look for mixes that contain perlite or vermiculite to improve drainage and avoid anything too dense or clay-like. Now, basil is what we call a heavy feeder compared to some other herbs. It grows fast, produces a lot of leaves, and uses up the nutrients in its soil relatively quickly. In a pot, those nutrients don't get replenished naturally the way they would in a garden bed, so you need to add them back. The best approach for indoor basil is a balanced liquid fertilizer, something with roughly equal parts nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, applied at half strength every 2 to 3 weeks during the growing season. You don't want to overdo the fertilizer either, especially with nitrogen, because too much can make the leaves grow very large but reduce their flavor and fragrance. A light, consistent feeding schedule is far better than occasional heavy doses. I also want to mention organic options because they work wonderfully and tend to be gentler. Worm castings, diluted compost tea, or a fish emulsion fertilizer are all great choices for basil. They feed slowly and improve the overall soil structure at the same time. An older gardener named Ivy, who's been growing herbs for decades, swears by a simple homemade fertilizer of diluted banana peel water. She soaks banana peels in water for a couple of days and uses the nutrient-rich water to feed her plants every week. I can't promise it's scientifically optimized, but her basil is always gorgeous, so maybe there's something to it. One thing I want to circle back to is the importance of starting with healthy plants or seeds. If you're buying a basil plant from a grocery store, understand that those plants are typically grown in commercial greenhouses under ideal conditions and then suddenly moved into the drastically different environment of your home. Many of them go into shock and decline quickly, which has nothing to do with anything you're doing wrong. It's just a rough transition. One way to help is to gradually acclimatize the plant over several days, keeping it in a shadier spot first and slowly moving it to a brighter location. Give it extra attention during those first 2 weeks, and don't be surprised if it drops a few leaves during the adjustment period. Growing from seed is another wonderful option, especially if you want to start fresh with plants that are used to your indoor conditions from the very beginning. Basil seeds germinate quickly, usually within 5 to 10 days in warm conditions, and watching them sprout is one of those simple garden joys that never gets old. Start them in a small seed tray or even a repurposed egg carton. Keep the soil consistently moist and warm. Around 70 degrees Fahrenheit is ideal. And once they have their first set of true leaves, thin them out so only the strongest seedlings remain. When they're about 3 to 4 inches tall, transplant them into their permanent pots and treat them with all the care we've talked about today. I also want to share a few bonus tips that don't fit neatly into the 6 mistakes, but that make a real difference in the quality and longevity of your indoor basil. First, harvest in the morning if you can. That's when the essential oils in the leaves are most concentrated, which means the best flavor for cooking. Second, always harvest from the top of the plant, taking the newest growth rather than stripping lower leaves. Keeping the lower leaves intact helps the plant continue photosynthesizing efficiently. Third, never wash basil until you're ready to use it. Excess moisture on the leaves can cause them to turn black and deteriorate quickly in storage. If you end up with more basil than you can use fresh, there are several great ways to preserve it. Freezing is one of the easiest. Just blend fresh basil leaves with a little olive oil and freeze the mixture in ice cube trays. Then pop the cubes into a freezer bag and you've got ready-to-use basil portions for soups, sauces, and stews all year long. You can also make a big batch of pesto and freeze that, or dry the leaves in a low oven or food dehydrator, though it's worth noting that dried basil loses a significant amount of its flavor compared to fresh or frozen. Another thing worth mentioning is companion planting, even indoors. Basil is famously friendly with tomatoes. There's an old belief that they actually help each other grow. And while the science on that is debated, what's not debated is that basil can help deter certain pests that also trouble tomatoes. If you're growing cherry tomatoes in a sunny window or on a balcony, having a pot of basil nearby is a lovely combination, both aesthetically and practically. The smell of basil also tends to confuse and repel aphids, whiteflies, and spider mites, which are among the most common indoor plant pests. Speaking of pests, let's spend a moment there because even indoor plants can get them, especially if you bring new plants in from outside or from a nursery without inspecting them first. The most common culprits with indoor basil are aphids, which are small, soft-bodied insects that cluster on new growth and the underside of leaves, and fungus gnats, which are those tiny flying bugs that appear around overwatered soil. For aphids, a simple spray of water can knock them off, and a diluted neem oil solution applied every few days will keep them from coming back. For fungus gnats, the solution is almost always to let the soil dry out more between waterings. Their larvae can only survive in consistently moist soil, so drying things out a bit removes their breeding ground. Sticky yellow traps placed near the pot can also catch adult gnats and help you monitor the population. Fusarium wilt and downy mildew are two fungal diseases that can affect basil, and they look different but both start with the plant looking limp, discoloured, or patchy. Fusarium wilt causes sudden wilting of entire stems even when the soil is moist, while downy mildew shows up as greyish or purple fuzzy patches on the undersides of leaves with yellowing on top. Good air circulation, avoiding wet foliage, and not overwatering are your best defences against both. If you notice either one, remove affected leaves immediately and isolate the plant from others to prevent spread. Now, I want to talk about one more thing that I think is really underappreciated, and that's the mental and emotional side of growing herbs indoors. Sounds a bit philosophical for a gardening video, I know, but stick with me. There's real documented research showing that having living plants in your home reduces stress, improves air quality, and even boosts your mood and concentration. And there's something extra satisfying about growing something you can eat. Every time you pinch off a handful of fresh basil to add to your dinner, there's a tiny sense of accomplishment and connection to the natural world that's hard to get from a plastic package of herbs from the supermarket. Once you experience it, you'll understand why so many people get genuinely passionate about growing their own herbs. Let's dig a little deeper into the world of basil varieties because this is something a lot of indoor gardeners don't think about until they've been growing for a while, and it genuinely opens up a whole new dimension of enjoyment. Most people are familiar with Genovese basil, the classic, large-leafed variety with that sweet, slightly peppery flavour that's the backbone of Italian cooking. And Genovese is a wonderful choice for indoors, absolutely. But there are dozens of other varieties worth exploring, and some of them actually perform even better in indoor conditions. Thai basil, for example, is a variety with smaller, sturdier leaves and a slightly anise-like spicy flavour that's essential in Southeast Asian cooking. It's more tolerant of heat and tends to bolt a little more slowly than Genovese, which means it can stay productive for longer stretches without constant pruning attention. If you cook a lot of Thai curries, stir-fries or Vietnamese pho, keeping a pot of Thai basil on your windowsill is a genuine game-changer for your kitchen. The flavour you get from fresh Thai basil is something the dried versions simply cannot replicate. Then there's lemon basil, which has a bright citrusy fragrance and flavour that pairs beautifully with fish, chicken, and even in teas and desserts. It's a slightly more delicate plant than Genovese, but absolutely doable indoors with the right care. Purple basil, sometimes called dark opal or red rubin, is another gorgeous option. It has deep burgundy or almost black leaves, and a flavour that's a little earthier and more complex than green varieties. It's also visually stunning in a pot, making it as much a decorative plant as a culinary one. If you ever want to create a little herb display on a sunny shelf, mixing green Genovese with purple basil and maybe some bright green Thai basil makes for a truly beautiful arrangement. There's also holy basil, known in India as tulsi, which holds deep spiritual and medicinal significance in Ayurvedic traditions. Its flavour is quite different from culinary basil, more clove-like and peppery, sometimes with notes of black pepper and mint, and it's traditionally used to make herbal teas believed to support immune health and reduce stress. Growing tulsi indoors is a lovely project even if you never use it in cooking, just for the extraordinary fragrance it releases when you brush against its leaves. Many people find the scent deeply calming, which ties right back to what we said earlier about the emotional benefits of growing plants at home. Something else that doesn't get talked about enough in indoor herb gardening conversations is the water quality you're using on your plants. Most of us just use tap water, and in many places that's perfectly fine. But tap water in some cities contains higher levels of chlorine, fluoride, or mineral salts, and over time those can accumulate in your potting soil and start affecting your plants. The most noticeable sign is white, crusty deposits building up on the surface of the soil or along the inside rim of the pot. Some plants tolerate this better than others, but basil can be sensitive to it. The simplest fix is to let your tap water sit in an open container overnight before using it. This allows most of the chlorine to dissipate naturally, and your plants will appreciate the difference. If you live somewhere with particularly hard water, meaning water with a high mineral content, using filtered water or collecting rainwater for your indoor plants can make a noticeable improvement in their overall vigor and color over time. It might sound like a small detail, but gardening is often about the accumulation of small details, and each one adds up to the overall health of your plant. Another often overlooked factor is pot material. You might not think it matters much whether your basil is in a terracotta pot versus a plastic one, but it actually does in a few meaningful ways. Terracotta pots are porous, which means they allow air and moisture to move through the walls of the pot. This naturally aerates the soil and helps it dry out more evenly, which is great for preventing root rot. The downside is that terracotta dries out faster, so you may need to water a little more frequently. Plastic pots retain moisture longer, which can be helpful in very warm or dry environments, but increases the risk of overwatering in cooler or more humid ones. There's no universally right answer. It depends on your specific home environment, watering habits, and the season. But understanding the difference helps you make a more informed choice and adjust your watering schedule accordingly. Let's also talk a bit about humidity, because indoor environments, especially during winter when heating systems are running, can get quite dry. Basil is a tropical plant, so it appreciates some ambient moisture in the air. In very dry indoor conditions, the leaf edges can start to crisp and brown even when everything else seems fine. A simple way to raise the humidity around your plant is to place the pot on a shallow tray filled with pebbles and water. As the water evaporates, it creates a small humidity zone right around the plant. Just make sure the pot is sitting on top of the pebbles rather than in the water, so the drainage holes aren't submerged. A small humidifier nearby works even better if you have one, and it's a worthwhile addition to any room where you keep a lot of plants. Misting is something you'll see recommended in many places, but I want to offer a gentle caution here. While a very light misting of the leaves can temporarily raise humidity, it can also leave moisture sitting on the foliage for extended periods, especially if your home doesn't have great air circulation. Wet leaves are more susceptible to fungal problems like the downy mildew we mentioned earlier, so if you mist, do it in the morning so the leaves have time to dry before evening and don't overdo it. The pebble tray method is safer and more consistent for basil specifically. I also want to spend a moment talking about propagating basil from cuttings, because it's one of the most satisfying and cost-effective tricks in an indoor gardener's toolkit. If you have a healthy, established basil plant, you can take stem cuttings and root them in water to create entirely new plants for free. All you need is a stem that's about 4 to 6 inches long, with at least 2 pairs of leaves on it. Strip off the lower leaves so you have a clean stem. Place it in a glass of water in a bright spot, but not direct sun, which can overheat the water, and wait. Within 1 to 2 weeks, you'll see white roots emerging from the nodes on the stem. Once those roots are about 1 inch or 2 long, pot the cutting up in soil and care for it like any young basil plant. This is something that a gardener named Lucas did when he wanted to expand his indoor herb collection without spending more money. He started with 1 good Genovese plant, took 3 cuttings from it, rooted them in water glasses on his kitchen windowsill, and within a month he had 4 thriving basil plants. He gave 2 away to friends and kept 2 for himself. 1 for the kitchen and 1 for his home office. It's a genuinely simple process that anyone can do, and it's incredibly rewarding to watch those little roots appear and grow in the glass. Now, one final thought I want to leave you with before we wrap up today. There's sometimes a pressure in the gardening world, especially online, where everything looks perfectly curated, to have flawless plants all the time. But real gardening is messy and imperfect and full of trial and error. Plants die. Experiments fail. Sometimes you do everything right and the plant still struggles for reasons you can't quite identify. That's not failure. That's just the nature of working with living things. The gardeners who get the best results over the long term are not the ones with some magical innate talent. They're the ones who keep showing up, keep paying attention, keep adjusting, and most importantly, keep enjoying the process even when it doesn't go perfectly. Daisy, Oliver, Rose, Ivy, Lucas, all the gardeners I've mentioned today, they all started exactly where many of you might be right now. A little unsure, a little frustrated, maybe with a wilting plant on the windowsill and a lingering feeling that they just didn't have a green thumb. But the truth is, a green thumb isn't something you're born with. It's something you develop by paying attention, learning from your plants, and being willing to adjust what you're doing. Basil is actually a wonderful teacher in that way. It gives you clear feedback. Too little light, it stretches. Too much water, it droops and yellows. Too hot or too cold, it blackens. Once you learn to read those signs, you stop second-guessing and start responding. And that's when growing plants indoors stops feeling like a chore and starts feeling like a conversation. So to wrap everything up in practical terms, find your sunniest window or invest in a grow light. Water only when the top inch of soil is dry. Use a pot with drainage holes and give your plant enough room to spread out. Prune regularly and pinch off every flower bud you see. Keep it away from cold drafts and air conditioning, and feed it with a diluted balanced fertilizer every couple of weeks. Pay attention to the small things too. Your water quality, your pot material, the humidity in your room, and the variety of basil you choose to grow. Each of those little details adds up to a plant that's not just surviving, but genuinely thriving. If you've been growing basil indoors and struggling, I really hope today's breakdown has given you some clear direction on what to try next. And if you're just starting out, you're in a wonderful position. You can avoid all 6 of these mistakes from day one and set yourself up for success right from the beginning. Either way, the important thing is to just start. Buy a plant. Plant some seeds, give it a good home on your windowsill, and pay attention to what it tells you. You'll learn more from actually doing it than from any amount of reading or watching, though I hope this gave you a really solid foundation to build on. Thank you so much for spending this time with us here at Botanic Haven. This channel exists because of you, because of your questions, your curiosity, your love for growing things and making your living spaces greener and more alive. If you found value in today's guide, please share it with someone who's been struggling with their basil, or with anyone who's been wanting to start an indoor herb garden but hasn't taken the plunge yet. More people in the world growing their own food and surrounded by plants. That's a goal worth working toward together. Until next time, take good care of your green friends, and we'll see you right back here at Botanic Haven.